Welcome to Intersection, where theology and practice meet. I'm delighted to host today, along with my co-host Randy Harris, a couple of board-certified chaplains. We welcome Paul Riddle and Casey McCollum to Intersection today. Thanks to both of you for being here. It's great to have you on the Intersection. We're going to talk about today everything you wanted to know about chaplaincy, but we're afraid to ask. I'm afraid we may be guilty of overselling that just a little bit. I don't know how in the world we could talk about everything there is to say about chaplaincy in an hour program, but we're gonna give it a go to at least highlight some things about chaplaincy today. For those of you who are joining us, let us know where you're coming from. See folks familiar and new as I'm looking at the chat, so it's a delight to have you all here. About halfway through the program, we'll be inviting you, our viewers, to help us with questions. So if you've got questions as we go along, place those in the Q&A feature of the panel at the bottom of your screen. Use Q&A for questions. Use chat to talk to one another and to the broader room. But if you've got questions, use the Q&A feature. Paul, we're glad to have you and Casey. Paul is a board-certified chaplain and serves with Lifeline Chaplaincy in Houston, Texas, after years as a chaplain, both in the military, the U.S. Navy, as well as in hospitals. And Casey McCollum serves as a chaplain for the hospital system in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Serves as the manager, the lead, I think, for her hospital. A lot of experience working in hospitals there, along with her husband, Casey, having a lot of experience in ministry as well. So thank you both for being here. Both of you have got degrees from ACU and other places. We're grateful for your presence. Well, before we get into this conversation, I'd like to invite us all into a moment of prayer. So let me invite you to a minute of silence as we welcome the presence of God in our conversations today. Eternal God, there is no place that we can go where you are not already present. And because of that, we believe you are present in this space, and we are asking that by the power of your Spirit, that you would bless this hour as we seek to be formed by what we learn and what we know and what we come to know. And we pray this in the name of Christ. Amen. Well, Paul and Casey, I just, what is a chaplain and what do they do? Give us a 90-second elevator speech, Paul. What does a chaplain do?
Well,
and be careful, Paul. I think your boss is on here, so make sure.
Yeah. I gotta make sure. And well, that is a harder question to answer than you might think. But I think that my take on what we do is I see myself primarily as a trained ministry professional who provides support to people who are coping with serious illness. Chaplaincy is a bigger world than that. My world is the world of healthcare, but there are also chaplains who operate in other spaces as well.
Right.
Military, industry and other places. And one of the things that really gives me life is that I get to come alongside people in their secular settings and in their everyday world. You know, church can sometimes be a world of its own, and many good things about that. But I get to do ministry in the everyday world.
Right.
And
Right.
people who are dealing with serious illness are dealing with serious spiritual issue. They're doing serious spiritual work.
Mhm.
They are seeking to make sense of what's happening. Sometimes their ways of their ideas about the way God operates are being challenged. There's disruption that's been entered into their life by the illness. And what I do is I come alongside them, I walk alongside them. A lot of what I do is listen. I also often think that, you know, you can almost judge how good a visit was by the ratio of listening to talking. And if I come away from a patient visit thinking, wow, I really nailed that observation that I made, that thing I said, boy, that was great. That probably wasn't a very good visit.
Right.
If I come away thinking about something that the patient has said, a realization that they have had, or a thing that they're wrestling with, then it probably was a pretty good visit because it was about them and not about me.
That's good. You know, Casey, as you think about this, you're bringing all of these professional ministry skills into conversation with people. But unlike many ministers, you're taking whoever comes in the door, right? I mean, you're having to work across people with many faiths or no faiths or broad traditions. Talk a little bit about the kind of environment in say in a hospital and the people that you're encountering.
So healthcare is one of the most diverse workplace settings there is right now. And so we're interacting with people of various religious affiliations or no religious affiliations. However, every person has values, and every person is seeking a place of belonging or has their identity or seeking meaning in their life.
Meaning, yeah, seeking
And
meaning.
so we are facilitating the spirituality of the person before us, whether that be a patient, their family member, or our staff, our employees who are also affected by the work that they do day in and day out. And I like to see myself as facilitating their spirituality. It's born out of my own values, but it's not about my values. It's trying to discern what another person holds most dear, and then how that is at work in their life in this current circumstance. And is there, maybe threat seems too harsh of a word, but is there a challenge or a way that they're experiencing any difficulty in living out those values at that particular point in time?
Right.
So Paul was talking about you want to do more listening than talking, but I'm wondering from both of you, if you work in hospital settings where, well, the patients often die. What does success look like in for a chaplain in a situation where people may or may not have your values, they may not share your faith, they may not get better? How do you go home at night and say, okay, that was a good day?
I guess I'll start. It's definitely not about survivability or anything like that. That's never a part of my day usually. But I would describe it more as experiences of beauty and or peace. And what I mean by that is when either a person has found a sense of peace of their current situation, and or they have a sense of community that's going to help them carry the fact that they're not at peace right now. And so there's like a communal element of support and love and care. And if I've been able to participate in facilitating some of those things, then to me, that's a pretty good day. It's a pretty good day.
Paul, how about you?
I would agree with that. And for me, it's about, success. I don't normally think about in terms of success and failure in the work that I do, but what I hope happens in a patient encounter is that there is honesty.
Yeah.
And that there is genuineness, and that I can come in and be seen, perceived, sensed as a safe person for the patient and others in the room to share what's on their hearts, that is of concern to them. And that can be hopes, it can be fears, it can be regrets, it can be, the whole gamut of emotions. But I think success, if you want to go with that word, a successful patient encounter is one where the patient feels free to be honest with themselves, with those who are in the room. A lot of times, patients and their families and loved ones are at different places in coping with their illness. Very often, a patient who's dying reaches a point of reconciliation, of acceptance that they're dying before the family does. Now, that's not always the case, but very often it is. And so sometimes the chaplain is in the position of having to support people in the room who are at different places of acceptance of the reality of the situation.
Right. Let's pick up on that for a minute. There are many ways in which ministers and chaplains are doing similar work, right? But there's also distinctive things, and we might get into some of that in a bit. But I think a lot of folks who are in ministry, I'd be curious to have you all reflect. How do you help a person die well? What are some things that as a chaplain are front of mind as you're in those kinds of spaces? How do you help a person die well? How do you help a family release or relinquish their loved ones in those kinds of spaces? Paul, I'll go your way first.
Okay, there's no formula for this.
Yeah.
I think for me, the way to help a person die well is to open up a space where they can be real, where they can, if they're verbal, if they're able to talk, they can say what's important to them. Sometimes in death situations, there's a patient there and there are family members, and I try to provide an opportunity, if death is approaching, for those loved ones who are present to say what's on their hearts. And sometimes this can happen even after the patient has died. Many a time I've been called to a situation where the patient has died, there are family members there, and I encourage them to express what's on their hearts.
Mhm.
If they have something that they want to say, even if the patient has died, imagine that they're still here. And it might be, I love you. I'm going to miss you. If the patient is in the process of dying, it may be something along the lines of, we're going to miss you terribly, but if you're ready to go, we're ready to let go.
Mhm.
You know, that sort of thing. Try to facilitate honesty.
Mhm.
Try to facilitate genuineness
Mhm.
on the part of the person who's dying and the others who are in the room with them.
Right. Yeah. Casey, how would you respond to that? What are some things that you're engaging front of mind as you are in those spaces?
A lot of it varies from patient to patient, as he's already said, based on how alert and how participatory they're able to be at that moment. And just because they're not alert does not mean that they're not still going through their own spiritual process. So just being mindful of conversations and interactions you're having with the patient, even if they can't respond back to you. So treating, even if a patient is unconscious, with dignity and respect by still calling them by name and introducing yourself and why you're here, and recalling the people that are in the room with them and that they're not alone right now.
Mhm.
And then, just like you, Paul already said, providing space and shutting up long enough for people to have time to reflect. And I don't mean that in a cursory way. Is a lot of times people are really anxious with silence or space, and so not rushing to fill that
Right. Mhm.
can be really, really helpful.
Right.
And then I think sometimes it's just acknowledging what you see and whatever emotions you may be sensing from a person, just to check that out. Is there anything that you're afraid of right now? If
Mhm.
they're awake and alert. Is there anything that's of concern to you, or things that you want to say, or and sometimes people will say, no, I'm really okay. I just want my family to be okay. But if you opened up a space for them to say that in front of their family, for them to be able to hear that they're actually at peace with the fact that they're going to die, and that their only concern is actually that they're okay, then I don't want to say it makes it easier, but it changes things.
Mhm.
And you're allowing people to come together and be present together at that moment.
I assume that sometimes you go to places where you are unbidden. I mean, I assume there are times when people ask you to come in, and there are other times when you just show up, right?
Mhm.
When you just show up, how do you start? I'm sure you introduce yourself, but you have no idea about whether they're Christian or not Christian, or whether they're actually resistant. You have no idea about what the tensions may be in the room with the family. There's lots of stories probably hovering in the air. How do you get started in that situation?
Well, depending on if this has been a cold visit, like a general rounding, or someone has asked me to come in, like a nurse or another person of the care team, but the patient or family doesn't necessarily know, that influences how I would introduce myself. And healthcare workers pick up on a lot of family dynamics. And so you can gather some information before you go in. But I'm going to introduce myself as the chaplain. And if I I try to state why I am there and why I'm not there. If I know a little bit, about those circumstances, and that I am here as a source of support for them and their family if they want that, if they need that. And it depends on, again, what their circumstances are as to kind of how I would continue forward with that. I mean, that's kind of like a general.
Yeah, you ever get a flat turned down?
Yeah, but not as much as you might think. Especially when, so part of my little caveat too is I'm one of the one people in this hospital that you can always say no to, and we respect that. You have nurses that need to give you medicine, you have doctors that come in at a certain time, you have people coming to take your blood at a certain time, and it works when it basically on their schedule. But I'm someone you can always say no to, and it's not going to hurt my feelings, and I'm not going to take it personal, because this is a place for healing for you. And if this isn't helping you right now, that's okay. And there's a lot of kind of relief for that when they realize you're not here to try to convince them or save them or something like that. They may just say, oh, well, no, this really isn't a good time, but thank you. Wow, like you're just, they're kind of taken aback, I guess.
Yeah, I echo everything that Casey has said. And one of the things that I try to bear in mind is that people have different experiences with their faith communities. And some of those, for some people, their experience, they're plugged into a faith community and it's life-giving for them, and they've got all kinds of relationships, and it's almost impossible for them to imagine that that church or church life or life within a faith community could be anything other than just wonderful and positive. But for others, it's not that way.
Right.
Sometimes people have been burned by their faith community. Sometimes they've been rejected for one reason or another. I think particularly of so many people in the LGBTQ community, and people who have been divorced or who've had other kinds of things in their lives. I had a visit with somebody a few weeks ago that stands out in my mind. This was a person who had a severe liver disease as a result of, a lifetime of abusing alcohol. And their church's way of trying to help them was basically constantly to preach at them and threaten to disfellowship them if they didn't quit drinking. And eventually, I don't know whether they formally disfellowshipped this person or not, but she certainly felt like they had. And so for her, that whole church thing was pretty complicated. One of the things that I try to do is disarm some of that by trying to present myself as somebody who isn't there to judge them and is there to be of support and to meet them where they are. And what's said here stays here. I'm not going to report back to your elders, so to speak. And to reiterate what Casey said, if my presence is not something that you want right now, that's okay.
That's good.
But I'm here.
That's
And
good.
I find that people respond positively to that more often than not, way more often than not. Even if they don't really profess a faith, they respect the fact that they're treated with respect.
Right. Thanks, Paul. Oh, Randy, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking, we have quite I don't know everybody who's on right now, but several of them are from chaplain communities. If I gave you the question, The one thing that chaplains wish churches and other ministers understood about their ministry, but don't. You know, what's the one thing you'd want to tell us? And I'll invite those who are chaplains, if they want to answer that in chat, they can do that too. But if you're speaking for that group, what is it you want the rest of us to understand, or what is one thing you've learned you could teach us that would enhance our own ministry?
One, we are not here to evangelize or to try to help with a deathbed confession or salvation or something like that. That is against our code of ethics. And so unless those spiritual needs are prompted by the patient themselves, that's not something that we would facilitate. Now, we can absolutely address the spiritual distress for family members and or loved ones that are concerned about that, but we're not going to then try to go and save a patient. And sometimes people think a chaplain is simply a pastor in a hospital. So those, if that's a value that they have as a minister, that we would then share that. And that's just a difference in our roles.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you know, sometimes people will call upon chaplains to sort of do their bidding. You know, you're a family member, an anxious family member, they're worried that their loved one is going to die and go to hell, and go in there and save, you know, my loved one. There's a conversation that needs to take place with that loved one about that loved one's anxiety. And, you know, the chaplain may go visit the patient, but what happens between the chaplain and the patient is going to be driven by the patient's needs and interests, not by the anxieties of that outside person. However much they may love the patient, you know, those are two different relationships.
I would love to hear a 1-minute summary of how you respond to that family member who says, if they die, I think they're going to go to hell. I want you to get them to make a confession of faith in Jesus. Just give us some. How do you give us a little something on how you respond to that?
So I ask if they are open to a conversation a little bit about their faith. Like the person that is saying, I want you to go in there. Tell me a little bit about your faith and what you believe about this. Tell me about why this is so important to you. And it's not that I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to make assumptions about what you believe, because this is really important to you. And so it's important that I understand where you're coming from and see what comes out from there. Usually it's a lot of stories. It'll start with, I believe this, and this. And then usually it will go to, and then I had this experience in this story. And then I feel like I'm kind of getting more at the meat of what's driving the spiritual distress there.
Yeah.
To make some sense of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's driving that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would try to identify a core emotion and try to engage the person around that, maybe make an observation. You know, it sounds like you're very anxious about, you know, the salvation of your loved one. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Am I hearing that correctly? And tell me more about your feelings about that. And your, you know, I would try to hear them out But again, I would not agree to do their bidding.
Mhm.
That's a thing that's a bright line there. And many ministers and many church members, they understand that, but some don't.
Mhm.
You know, some have a mindset that just, by golly, this is your job.
Mhm.
And, you know, you have to be a little bit diplomatic sometimes, but you also have to maintain that boundary. And, you know, one of my core beliefs, both as a human being and as a chaplain, is that the patient is an adult, they're competent, they are responsible for their relationship with God, whatever that, and however they frame that, however they define it. And they have had a lifetime to work out this God thing. They are living their life. And it is not my job to go, I am not responsible for their relationship to the divine. And
Right.
one of the things that we stress in our training of spiritual care volunteers and our interns, and this is also something that's an important part of the clinical training of chaplains, is being sensitive to where the responsibility lies.
Mm.
And who's responsible for what. And the patient is responsible for their life, their decisions, I am not responsible for that other person. And so that's an important piece of it for me.
Well,
And to me,
taking this, flipping that a little bit, thinking about this conversation here might be insightful to those who practice or who are ministers. What would it be? What is it about being a chaplain that, like, why are you a chaplain, right? So, what gives you meaning as a chaplain? What is it that brings you into a hospital room? What is it that motivates you? Where do you find meaning in the practice of chaplaincy? Where does that rest for you? Curious.
I can't imagine doing anything else. And I think right now this is my calling, and who knows if my calling will change, but this, I can't imagine doing anything else. And the thing that I love most about it is literally one of the most diverse settings when it comes to racial, ethnic diversity, religious diversity, socioeconomic diversity, educational diversity, like all these different things all coming together with a common mission, especially where we are, to take care of our community and to facilitate health and wholeness and well-being in our community. And I love the interdisciplinary work that we get to do. We participate in our interdisciplinary rounds on a daily basis. So we're interfacing with our ICU doctors, with the bedside nurses, with the respiratory therapists, with our physical therapists, and the collaboration to come together for the sake of a patient. Our physical therapists are some of the best referrers, period, because they notice when someone's activity level changes and when they seem more discouraged and not participating in certain parts of their care, and they say, I think there's something going on here. Can you go see them? Or like a patient I saw yesterday who came in for chest pain, and the nurse said, she's crying every time we walk in the room. Can you go in? And I go to visit her, and she said, I need someone to talk to help me stop feeling the way that I feel. And I said, well, how are you feeling? I'm just so angry. I'm so angry and I don't want to feel that way. And I said, well, is this new? Did something happen? Oh, yeah. My my daughter was violated and her perpetrator's getting out on parole. And no matter how many people I've said this isn't safe, he's tried to connect with us, like, oh, so there's a lot more going on here. She's reaching out for help. It all presented as chest pain. And they couldn't figure out the source of the chest pain. But it turns out, after listening, discerning, I said, perhaps this anger is really important, actually. Like, perhaps there is meaning in this anger, that it is perhaps giving you the energy to take action that needs to take action. Like, I know it doesn't feel good, but like, perhaps there's something important here. And so we got her resources for like survivors of sexual assault and victims assistance and therapists, because she wanted all of those things. But she hadn't shared all of those things
until that moment.
And some people might say, well, but what's spiritual about that? Well, because it comes back to her own story of her own experiences, how she saw herself and her role within her family, and how was she doing it? Was she protecting her family in the way that she should? And I mean, there was a lot more to it, and I won't go into all of that, but I mean, there was a lot more meat there if given the space to actually explore it. And to get connected back into the community where she needed it. Because when you have a church, oftentimes you have at least opportunities for connection. And more people than not that I interact with are not connected to any faith community. And there's a lot of social isolation. There's a lot of spiritual isolation. And so there's not the points of connections that people maybe once had 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
I guess more commonplace. I'm not saying universal, but at least more common.
Right.
That was a long answer. I'm sorry, to why I do what I do.
Love it. Yeah. Being able to walk into those spaces and ask those kinds of questions. Paul, let me ask a little different question. Our time is getting away. And by the way, those of you who are watching, viewing with us, please ask questions in the Q&A. We're going to turn to there quickly. But Paul, I'm going to ask a kind of a mundane question. And this is a cue for an unapologetic plug for the Siburt Institute Chaplains Fellowship, right? And some of the endorsing work that you and others, and Casey's a part of this team as well. To be a chaplain, one needs to have some credentials, right? An MDiv or its equivalent. There's clinical training, pastoral CPE, clinical pastoral education programming that has to go through a lot there. How would you could you summarize quickly, since we're supposed to be talking about everything you want to know about chaplains, but afraid to.
Sure.
Give us a kind of rundown of what it takes to be a chaplain, and at least we'll just kind of let it set in hospital spaces here.
Okay. Kind of in the professional
clinic. Yeah. Chaplain.
Yeah. A lot of times I get phone calls from people. I'd say at least once or twice a month, I'll get a phone call from a minister who's getting ready to retire, or they're thinking about making a career change.
Right.
And they're thinking, well, I might like to become a chaplain. And, so what's that all about? And I tell them, first of all, there are different kinds of chaplaincy. There are people who work as volunteers, spiritual care volunteers who do some of the work that chaplains do. And that's a whole other conversation. The conversation we're having here is about a person who goes down the professional track and wants to work professionally as a chaplain in an institutional setting, like a hospital. And I'll just use hospital as the prime example here. By the way, military chaplaincy requires a lot of the same things, and the basic requirements, and you enumerated some of them. Graduate level work in religion at an accredited university or school or divinity school or seminary, and the accreditation is important. The Association of Professional Chaplains requires 72 hours of graduate level work. That usually translates to an MDiv or equivalent. There are some, there are some other ways of doing that, but that's basically the rule of thumb. MDiv or equivalent, 72 hours. Graduate level. Clinical pastoral education at an accredited CPE center. 4 units. A unit is about 400 hours. So 1,600 hours of clinical training, 2,000 hours of professional experience as a chaplain post CPE. So those are all things. Ecclesiastical endorsement, and this is the plug for the Siburt Institute for those who have connections to the Churches of Christ or the Stone Campbell movement tradition. If that's part of your religious identity, then we're an endorsing agency for that. And basically what that does is it is an official affirmation that you have a connection with a faith community in a particular faith tradition. Okay. And so what chaplains do is broader than religious ministry per se, but it does incorporate elements of that. And so that endorsement is important as a statement of a person's rootedness in a faith community where there's some accountability and so forth. And then, of course, you have to go through a process of applying for certification with a recognized chaplaincy association like the Association of Professional Chaplains. They're not the only one. They're one of the larger ones in North America. Casey and I are both certified through them, and Siburt is recognized by APC as an endorsing agency. We're willing to work with folks who are seeking endorsement through other agencies. And that can be another conversation for another time. But those are some of the basic elements.
As I was listening to that, let's suppose I got a compassionate, faith-filled person who says, "Oh, okay, that sounds like I want to do that." That sounded like it takes forever.
Well, it does. It doesn't take forever, but
it sounded very expensive, and it sounded very time intensive. So, tell me,
it is all of those things.
Yeah. How many years does it take?
Well, let's see. It takes about 3 years to earn an MDiv.
Let's suppose let's suppose the person has the MDiv. Okay, how long?
Okay, they have that, and then if they want to do CPE training, there are a number of ways of doing that. The way that most people do it is in the context of a year-long residency. So they would do a year-long residency. Those residencies are usually paid, but you're paid a minimum stipend. This is not, you're not going to get rich as a CPE resident. But that's probably the most common way. It's also possible to do CPE training through extended units, which is the way I did it. And that can be more spread out, and that's really designed for people who are working and can't just put their career on hold and do that.
Our organizations, particularly like the one that I'm a part of, which do extended units for people who hold that are currently working and plan to continue to work. And they have both educational, like classroom time, I guess is what you would call it, where they're like taking in information, as well as clinical time when they'd be doing patient visits. And that's spread out over a several month period so that they could be done concurrently. And there are opportunities to also do a residency if you want to. I like that option because of the way the learning builds, but we have some really skilled educators that are also able to work with you if you're wanting to do concurrent. If you want to do an extended unit and you need to do multiples of them, but not able to do a residency, some of them are able to work with you about your learning goals so that they continue to build rather than basically doing the same introductory chaplaincy work that you would do in like a single unit multiple times. They're going to grow your skills along the way. So there are lots of different ways in order to do that.
Randy, one way to think about your question is maybe you need to get on the Siburt Institute website and link in and have a visit with people like Paul and Casey, because there's just a lot of paths here. But it is not a short journey. It's one that takes a lot of time and training to be a professional chaplain. I noticed that Renee has posted the Siburt Institute link to our chaplaincy page that would give you information about the Siburt Institute's endorsement process. And there would be a link there. I don't want to put Paul on the spot. I think Paul's email may be there. Don't think Casey's is, but we'll if you want to find out more, please let us know at the Siburt Institute, and we'll find a way to get you connected to somebody on our team. Let me close that commercial that a bit by just saying that both Paul and Casey, along with several other board certified chaplains, serve as a steering team for the Siburt Institute Chaplains Fellowship. And there's a growing network of other chaplains across the country that would love to talk to people who are interested in the profession of chaplaincy or professional chaplaincy, or sort of being a certified chaplain. And we want to foster those kinds of conversations through the Siburt Institute. So don't hesitate to reach out. We'll find a way to connect you. You know, one person's asking a question. Let me kind of delve back into here. What's been the biggest challenge for your work? Maybe the faith challenge for your work, and how has it impacted your own personal faith and life? Has it enriched or deepened your faith, or or have there been times when you found your own faith severely challenged by what you experience in chaplaincy? Would you take a kind of a step into those kinds of spaces here for our viewers?
So yes, my faith is both challenged and enriched through this work. Most days. I find that I believe more and more in less and less. So the things that I hold dear, I have a deeper faith in those things, and then there's lots of things that I don't. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm actually really at peace with that. You can't do chaplaincy and not bump up against the impact of human suffering, a lot of which is not chosen, and that is when you see that day in and day out, and evil things can happen. And I don't believe that people themselves are evil, but people can do some horrendous things to other people. That sticks with you. Also, people can be incredibly caring and compassionate and self-giving beyond what I can imagine. And those things live side by side, day in and day out.
It's good.
Yeah. I guess one of my benchmarks, kind of one of my handholds on faith is, the promise in Scripture, God will never leave us or forsake us. But I take that not to mean that God, immunizes me from bad things happening, but that God is present with me in the midst of whatever happens, be it good or bad. And to me, that is a thing that sustains me. And it also helps me in dealing with the reality that there's a lot in life that's not fair, that there is a lot in human experience that is, God may be in the process of redeeming all this, but that process is not yet complete. That's the way I frame it theologically.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, it's really important to have a level of comfort with the fact that there's a lot that's unfair. There's also a lot that I'm not going to understand fully. I think the desire to understand is natural, but sometimes it's a desire for control. And there are a lot of things where, that control is just, I'm not going to be able to have it. And I've also learned to deal with my own doubts and to maintain faith in the midst of doubt. I don't have to have everything all figured out and, everything certain. I can still trust in God. And that's not a formula. That's not a, here are your 10 steps to spiritual health. But there's some things that I try to keep in mind that do sustain me.
Right. Thank you both. I'd like to, we've got just, if you could give me, boy, I am stumbling all over myself. This is not a simple question that can be answered quickly, but someone is asking, what have you found helpful when serving family members who are resistant to a patient's terminal condition? I turn to this question because I think this is one that ministers often find themselves being drawn into as a person it moves to the end of their life. And we're about to run out of time. That's why I'm stumbling. So I'll ask you, briefly, what would you say to that? What have you found helpful when serving family members who are resisting a patient's terminal condition? Maybe not embracing or accepting that. What might be something that you would, a strategy or an approach or a line of thinking that you would introduce?
I'd be curious where the resistance lies. Like, what is the resistance? I have found that trying to push people it's not helpful. If the person is dying, they're going to die whether someone accepts it or not. And people are responsible for their own, spirituality. But like, if we can explore that, if they're willing to explore that, then perhaps we can be of support to them. I'm recalling a time during COVID when we had people dying left and right, and there would be families that would not accept the process that is taking place. And some people would couch the conversation in like, this patient is suffering and is we need to reduce suffering. But then we also realized that this family's highest value was not actually the reduction of suffering, but attuning to their value of the pursuit of life, no matter what. And so there is a larger question then about what constitutes life and meaning and purpose, but they weren't talking to each other. They were really talking past each other about the values that they hold dear.
Yeah.
I don't know if that kind of gets at what you're getting at, but
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Let me see if we can land the plane here. And Paul and Casey, I'm going to ask you and Randy, what would be the one word that you want to leave us with? I'll ask you that in just a minute. But I want to say thank you to all of those who've been participating today. This has been a very significant and profound conversation, it seems to me. So thank you for being a part of this. Our next intersection will take place on March the 21st, March 21st. We'll have as our guest Susie Macaluso, a sociologist here at ACU, who also works with the Siburt Institute with an instrument we call the Church Health Assessment. And we're going to interview with her and let her reflect about the 40 to 50 churches we've been working with through that instrument on church health, and ask what we're learning about congregations through the Church Health Assessment. So look forward to that on March the 21st. But let me turn back now, Paul, Casey, Randy. I'll start with Paul and then Randy and then Casey. I'll let you have the last word. Paul, what's the one thing you'd want to leave us with today as you reflect about our conversation?
There's so much. I think, since I'm talking to a group of people, many of whom are ministers, and ministers tend to, be in broadcast mode. That's kind of the first instinct. I would say from a spiritual care skill standpoint, try to lead with listening.
Yeah. Thank you. Randy, what would you offer?
I think one of the great teachings of COVID, if we're willing to learn it, is there are things worse than death, and one of the worst things is loneliness. And being able to be there so people don't have to die alone, so they can have somebody just to kind of hold their hand. It's less about saying anything. It's more about being present. And that's a great gift that chaplains and the church could give to the world.
Yeah, thanks. Casey?
this is piggybacking on what they've said, but keep showing up. It makes a difference. I'm one of the people that hears about how my pastor, my minister showed up, and that 15 minutes, 30 minutes makes a bigger difference than you could imagine. So I want you to hear how important your presence is. And so make that trip to the hospital, make that trip to the care facility, to wherever it may be, make the trip. It'll be worth it to them.
Thank you. Again, Paul and Casey, thank you for your time today. And to all of you who've been a part and participated in today's webinar. Randy, give us a good word.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. To him who is able to keep you from falling and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy. To the only God, our Savior, be glory and majesty, dominion and power through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forevermore, world without end. Amen.